Started. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Parachute's Vision Zero webinar. Today, we're talking about advancing Vision Zero and the safe system application in Canada, tools, trends, and lessons for safer communities. We're very pleased to have you joining us today for the conversation. I know it's getting towards the end of the summer and everyone's schedules are busy with vacation and so forth, so thanks so much. I'm pleased to welcome our speakers, Raheem Dilgir from the TranSafe Consulting. He's going to be representing Tax Vision Zero and Safe System Outreach Committee. We also have my colleague Ann Stewart from Parachute. And Ann, I'm just going to do a shout out. Ann took a lead on working with our MPH student and curating over 250 pages of research for the Canadian Vision Zero landscape. So I asked her to join us today as well. And I'm very excited to be joined by Jessica Lamar, Director of Safe Mobility with the City of Edmonton. As many of you know, Edmonton was our first Vision Zero city in Canada. So we thought it would be a great opportunity to bring Jessica in to help with this session. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Val Smith. I'm the Director of Road Safety Programs at Parachute, and I lead all of our national road safety and Vision Zero work. Thank you again for taking the time to join us. A reminder, this session is being recorded. Everyone can put their questions into the Q&A section and we'll try to answer them as we go. And if not, we will answer them towards the end of the webinar. There's also going to be an evaluation pop-up that will come up at the end. And with that, I'm pleased to hand things over to Jessica.
Good morning or early afternoon, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thanks so much for joining us and for having me today to help moderate this conversation. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're joining today from communities across Canada, each located on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples who have cared for and been connected to this space for countless generations. I'm joining you today from Edmonton, or Amiskwaciy-Waskahigan, in Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis homelands. I'm grateful to our Indigenous brothers and sisters for all of the care that they have provided to these lands and for continuing to share their knowledge, cultures, and communities with all of us who call this place home. I think a lot about the connection we have to the commitment of our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And as we come together from across the country to talk about safe communities and safe mobility, I think there's a meaningful connection to our shared vision for these places. Communities where everyone is welcomed, valued, and able to move through their day safely. So on to today's topic. Like many of you, I spend a lot of time thinking not only about what we need to be doing to make our transportation system safer, but also about how we actually move that work forward within complex organizations in our communities. How do we know whether we're making progress? How do we sustain commitment over time? How can we learn from each other? And how do we build the organizational, political, and public support needed to turn Vision Zero from a thing we say into meaningful change? And that's what I think and am hoping we can really dig into today. We're fortunate to have two timely Canadian resources that give us different but complementary perspectives on those questions. Raheem is going to start off by sharing about the preliminary findings of TAC's 2025 Government Survey of Canadian Practices in Vision Zero and Safe System Approach. The survey gives us a national view of how governments are approaching this work and how practice has evolved since the previous survey. It looks across areas including policy adoption, targets and evaluation, partnerships, organizational capacity, and implementation of the different safe system elements. We'll then hear from Val and Ann from Parachute. Val and Ann will walk us through Parachute's 2026 Vision Zero Canadian Landscape 4.0, which gives us a different lens on the Canadian experience. It gets underneath the national picture and into the experiences of jurisdictions themselves, what they're doing, what they're learning, what's enabling progress, and where they're encountering challenges. And I think that's where putting these two pieces of work together gets particularly interesting. We're seeing Vision Zero adoption continue to grow in Canada. So perhaps the question for many jurisdictions is becoming less about whether we're committed to Vision Zero, but increasingly more about what it takes to successfully implement it. How do we measure success along the way when zero is an ambitious long-term goal? What happens when jurisdictions need to revisit the timelines they've established? This is certainly the space that Edmonton is in right now, and I know many others are facing this as well. What are we learning about the barriers to implementation? Technical, financial, organizational, political, cultural? And what can large municipalities with years of Vision Zero experience learn from a smaller or newer jurisdiction and vice versa? I also hope that we can talk about how we use resources like this. They're such valuable technical resources, but they can also help us understand where our own organization sits within the whole Canadian landscape. They can help us find peers, identify gaps, come up with new ideas, learn from approaches being tried elsewhere, and importantly, support conversations with senior leaders and elected officials about where road safety practice is evolving and what meaningful safe system implementation requires. I don't know about the rest of you, but not a topic comes by where I'm not asked what the jurisdictional scan looks like on this around here. And we have some great helpful resources that give you a start on that work already. So after the presentations, we'll spend the remainder of our time together in more of a conversation, exploring some of those questions and leaving plenty of room to follow where the findings take us. So let's get into it. Raheem, over to you.
Thank you, Jessica, for that introduction. Just maximizing. You see my full screen?
Yep.
Great. Okay, yeah, no, thank you. It's wonderful to be with you all today. Excited to present some preliminary insights from a survey that was conducted by the Transportation Association of Canada several months ago now. And it's still being kind of analyzed, and insights are being kind of identified, and there's some follow-up work that's to be done. So there's been nothing actually released publicly or even through to the TAC organization yet, just this presentation. So I'm excited to kind of share a preview of that today. I do want to acknowledge the work of the TAC. TAC is the Transportation Association of Canada, as Vision Zero and Safe System Outreach Subcommittee. In particular, the work of Jishan Ahmed, Tony Churchill, and several other members of an action team that joined me on kind of looking at the survey and how it can help both TAC as an organization as well as the industry at large. Just before I move to the off of the title slide, I want to point out the infographic on the left side. Perhaps many of you have seen it, but this was developed by TAC a couple of years ago now in a document called a primer for Vision Zero, or a primer for Canada, Vision Zero and the Safe System Approach. I'm also wearing the t-shirt that that has it on it. So yeah, if you want the t-shirts, then we can arrange to get you one. But yeah, I'm happy to share just a few quick examples of a very comprehensive survey, the details of which will be available at a later date. So quickly, a little bit about the Transportation Association of Canada. This kind of, its Road Safety Committee mandate in particular includes things like, developing and sharing information, addressing issues, providing network opportunities, developing national guidance. And I think a lot of those mandates were served well through this survey, as well as the mandate of the subcommittee itself. And I've just selected a few. Passages from the Road Safety Committee's mandate and highlighted that the committee is committed to the Vision Zero philosophy. This is a change that was made in the last couple of years, which I think is a healthy change in the right direction, that the Transportation Association of Canada and its committees are kind of putting it out there, that they are supportive of Vision Zero, the philosophy, and of the safe system approach. And the emphasis is probably very much on the safe system approach, more on the how than on the what, than on the goal itself. So, and then a lot of guidance is prepared in support of, helping us all to achieve the Vision Zero goal. So on the survey in particular, the objective was to really assess sort of where we're at and where we've come across the country in Vision Zero and road safety, and to also to try to assess the extent and impact of Vision Zero and safe system programming. The impact side is kind of a phase two of this survey, so that information is not really available yet. It's more painting a picture of what, oh, sorry, I think there's some automatic advancing in my slides. Apologize for that. Through sharing the results of the survey, we hope for everybody who can access it to, learn from current practices and maybe find where they are within that, among the different municipalities or provincial governments, and perhaps even that could assist facilitate some networking with them to continue the learning.
Raheem, I'm
Yeah.
so sorry to interrupt you, but if you could change your display into full screen instead of presenter mode, I think it'd be easier for folks to follow along.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Sorry, I thought it was there. Okay, here we are. Does that look better?
Looks
Did it
great.
change?
Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so just quickly in terms of who was surveyed, there were 50 responses, and out of those, 8 were from the provinces and territories, so 8 of the 13 responded. And then we separated municipalities into larger and smaller with the threshold of 150,000. So about 24 responses came from larger municipalities and 18 from smaller. And just quickly, I wanted to present this list because I won't have a chance to go through findings that kind of came from these various topics that were covered in the survey, but that's something to look forward to in publications that will come out on the survey results. So. As Jessica mentioned, it covers policy adoption. It also covers questions about, how partnerships were, how the partnership approach was taken and how engagement was done, and some of the road safety targets and data sources, a bit about emerging topics. Well, maybe they've been around actually a long time, but topics that I think we're thinking more about and maybe acting more on as well. So it was interesting to hear how road agencies are addressing topics like safety culture and equity, and also get an understanding of how are things working on the management side, like in terms of funding, forming committees, staffing Vision Zero and road safety in activities, and communication, as well as looking at actual implementation. What specific treatments are being implemented in different jurisdictions, and how do they support each of the safe system elements that you saw on that infographic I showed earlier. And as I said, there'll be follow-up interviews, and I think that's when we can ask all the why questions for why they answered the way they did, including things like why are they implementing certain treatments and not others. I'm going to share, excuse me, 6 quick insights in my available time here. Again, there were 30 questions, a really robust sample of questions. So this is just really just a tip of the iceberg. But I did want to kind of touch on how far we've come with Vision Zero policy adoption. And I do want to say that when I say Vision Zero, the way that TAC approached it is not restricted to communities that are using the term Vision Zero to describe their road safety program or their philosophy, but those that are consistent with the principles of Vision Zero, regardless of what they call it. So with that, there was it was interesting and encouraging to see the significant increase in policy adoption between 2021 and 2025. So approximately 60% of all those surveyed, municipally and provincially, have adopted Vision Zero. So that's a majority. There's still obviously a way to go. And how that broke down was among the provinces, there were none in 2021. Now, mind you, not everybody completed the survey. I know that there was at least one or maybe two, but it's a lot. It's a lot larger of a proportion now, or as of 2025, and probably even more now. Among larger municipalities, now up to 80% of those who responded to the survey have adopted Vision Zero, and approximately 30% of smaller municipalities. So there's obviously a ways to go there. Smaller municipalities have more challenges in terms of capacity and other things that we'll touch on some of as we go along here. So I'll share a couple of overall trends and then a couple of trends that are specific to the category of government agency that was surveyed. In terms of the partnership approach, it was quite encouraging to see compared to 2021, and I don't have the 2021 numbers, but it did indicate quite an increase in both the number of partners and excuse me there. And now this graphic is from larger municipalities. You can see over 90% of them involved several groups, where traditionally it may have been prepared or only involved the traffic engineering group. Just as many of them involve transportation planning. And the planning part of road safety is just as important, if not more, than the engineering side, but also transit and community and public health, which are all very important, as well as communications. Okay, so I think that was quite interesting. The other thing that was found is a lot more involvement of external partners, such as NGOs, other insurance agencies, etc. And that in 2025 there was a lot more consultation and engagement than in the previous cycle. Another trend among all those surveyed, which is quite interesting, was just such a wide range in access to data and the types of data. So you can see here all the different sources. Most jurisdictions get their data from the police, but it was interesting to report, first of all, that some of them don't receive even the police data till at least 1 year after the incident has occurred. So it could be, it could be stale by then. There could have been changes already made to several locations and patterns that are perhaps no longer as prominent. So it's important to have that timely information. In terms of sources, it was interesting to note that several jurisdictions actually rely on media reports. And I think we all know, although media is very important in road safety, there could be questions regarding the accuracy and completeness of media reports compared to perhaps other more established sources. In particular, I wanted to flag health authority or hospital data was very infrequently, let's say, used among those surveyed, and that arguably can perhaps be the most accurate or meaningful source of data that indicates the ultimate outcomes in terms of injury, serious injury, fatality, etc. So underutilization of hospital data, and there could be a separate presentation to explain why there is that underutilization. But also it's important to realize that reliance on media reports, perhaps in the absence of anything else. Some of those surveyed indicated they have just no data at all, especially the smaller municipalities. Provincially, I wanted to just highlight one trend in terms of hurdles to developing policy. I think I mentioned that I think it was 5 of the 8 provinces had established a Vision Zero policy, but those that didn't indicated the lack of knowledge with respect to the subject, as well as political will. So you see those two at the top of the list. Okay, and see this automated slides is actually helping keep me on time, so I'll be thankful for it. Among the larger municipalities, the one of the interesting questions was about how targets are approached, both in terms of the name, the use of Vision Zero, as well as the actual numerical target for achieving its goals. So about 80%, so the large majority of large municipalities do refer to their objectives as Vision Zero, as their ultimate goal. With respect to targets, not as many go as far as to set a specific year to achieve that goal. Still majority do not set a specific year, but there is also a good proportion that are actually putting a year forward in which to achieve that zero goal of fatalities and serious injuries. Among the smaller municipalities, a key trend, so I thought maybe I'll cover this different question about the treatments that are implemented in that jurisdiction. So there was one of these charts generated for each of the safe system elements. So in the case of a safe road design, the question was, what is being implemented at least on a relatively widespread basis? And it was interesting to note that although there's some measures that are known to be effective near the top, a number of the ones that are known to be the most effective are not as frequently implemented. So things like roundabouts, which is pretty much near the bottom of the list in smaller municipalities, or road diets, for example, are not as prominently implemented as some of the measures that are typically less costly or easy to implement, or maybe easier for the public to support. They're less controversial. But the point is that we're really kind of leaving a lot out there, I think, in terms of what can be implemented. And so if we can get over some of the issues in terms of funding, political will, etc., I think we can implement a lot more of the proven countermeasures. And I think I'll leave it at that in terms of insights. But just to quickly share that, some of this, the preliminary findings have been presented both through TAC and with other partners, including here today. We are conducting follow-up interviews to get a further insight into some of the trends that we noted. That will all be compiled hopefully by the end of the year into what TAC calls a briefing document, and then we'll put on a webinar in the new year to kind of take folks through that briefing and talk more about it. So with that, I'll stop sharing. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Raheem. Much appreciated. Next, over to Val and Anne from Parachute.
Thank you, Jessica. And I'm just going, while Julie's setting up the screen, can the audience just let me know if they're hearing any echo? Jessica, can you hear any echo? Or are we good? Excellent. Thank you.
Nothing from me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next slide, please, Julie. So Anne and I are going to be sharing the presentation. We'll go through it relatively promptly so that we can have a nice discussion after. So I'm going to be talking about our Vision Zero Canadian landscape. The landscape is a national resource dedicated to looking at Vision Zero jurisdictions across Canada. It's actually our fourth version. We did our first version in 2017. And similar to what Raheem has shared, what a difference between 2017 and 2026. A lot of momentum. So excited to share some of that today. The landscape is meant to capture real world experiences from the folks on the ground doing Vision Zero at the city level, jurisdictional level, and sometimes at the provincial level. We are sharing lessons learned across the stages of Vision Zero, and It's really meant to help jurisdictions strengthen and accelerate their programs, as well as share stories and connect with other municipalities. Next slide, please. So how did we approach this? So very similar approach to TAC. And TAC and Parachute did connect before both publications to make sure that we were aligned in what we were doing and filling any gaps and opportunities as well between the two publications. So Parachute reviewed research and gray literature identifying all the Vision Zero jurisdictions across Canada. As I said, we first did that in 2017, and we just built on it each version. So we conducted key informant interviews as well. We received 22 responses. We sometimes did these interviews on the phone, in Zoom, or in writing. And we asked the municipalities the same questions each time. So we had very consistent information that was being gathered, and we gathered it in a very anecdotal, qualitative way. We developed a summary for each jurisdiction, including background, collision data, Vision Zero plan, and key features, as well as stakeholders involved. Over to you, Anne.
The 4.0 landscape was released this past June and features 44 jurisdictions who have formally adopted Vision Zero as of January 2026. So just keep that in mind for any new released plans since that date. 24 of these were new adoption areas since 2022, since our 3.0 report. Again, you can see a lot of growth there, has been noted throughout the webinar. 3 of these jurisdictions were provinces, including BC, Manitoba, and Quebec, and then 41, the remaining jurisdictions were municipal and regional. And I also just wanted to note, I encourage participants to visit the Vision Zero map that Parachute has that features jurisdictions who have adopted, as well as who are considering adopting Vision Zero. And that's all been updated on our website as of June 2026. So we also looked at what frameworks jurisdictions are using to guide their Vision Zero plan and how they implement it. So of the 44 jurisdictions, 14 we found used only the safe systems approach. 11 framed their principles around the 6 E's of mobility safety or traffic safety, or a variation of this framework, ranging from 3 to 6 of the E's. And these commonly include engineering, education, and enforcement, evaluation, engagement, and equity. 13 of these jurisdictions used a combination of the safe systems approach and the 6 E's of mobility safety, and then 2 jurisdictions of note, Guelph and Chatham-Kent, used the new safe systems pyramid to frame their report, as well as also guided by the safe systems approach. And then 4 jurisdictions outline their unique frameworks and principles that their plan is built on. So regarding targets and timelines that we analyzed, so 42 of the 44 jurisdictions that we looked at indicated a specific end target for their Vision Zero plan. And of these 42 jurisdictions, 30 include a specific time frame for achieving their Vision Zero target, including this could range from a calendar year or plan duration target, a continuous downward trend in serious collision and fatalities, or a mix of those two, as you can see on the screen. Next slide. And also related to targets, we found that 20 jurisdictions have set within that interim reduction target, which is commonly around 10 to 15% reduction over 5 years, or 50% for serious injuries and fatalities. And then 12 jurisdictions, the remaining 12 jurisdictions provide a target with no specific time frame indicated.
Thanks.
Back over to you, Val.
Yeah, so I'll go through this quickly because I'm sure Jessica will be asking us about this in our discussion. Some trends and patterns we saw, and again, it was very similar to 3.0. So we're hearing the same trends, the same challenges, the same obstacles that we're hearing that we heard in 3.0. So a significant difference between rural and urban jurisdictions, no surprise there. Varying levels of political commitment that we also heard from TAC in terms of staffing, resources, and budget. Implementation continues to vary across urban areas as well as between urban and rural, including the pace that the programs are rolling out, the scope. And so we all know that the Vision Zero Safe System approach is not the same in each municipality, and that can present some challenges in itself. Moving from commitment to meaningful implementation remains a challenge, and some jurisdictions continue to face some criticism if their Vision Zero is not being seen as meaningful as it should be. Next slide. And then some lessons learned that came out of 4.0 is just that it's really important, as we know, to engage constituents, the public, and key stakeholders. Persistence and patience. We heard a lot of amazing stories from rural areas, from smaller areas about really being happy with those quick wins. Aligning Vision Zero with other strategic priorities, as well as really identifying those points of intersection so that you can leverage resources and partnerships and timing. Yeah, and then we'll get into this a little bit more in our discussion. Thank you. Over to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Val and Ann. Great to hear about the landscape document as well. As we go through our discussion today, to all of those of you joining us, I promise not to brag too much about Edmonton. A quick shout out to all of the folks from my team who are attending the webinar today. We've even got colleagues from Edmonton from the Alberta Motorists Association. So while I won't brag too much, I also promise to tell you about the crunchy bits in Edmonton too as we go through our questions, because none of us have this down pat. There is certainly no perfect science behind implementing and advancing Vision Zero. I want to start about defining and measuring success in this work. So I think about evidence is so tricky. We've got traditional data, we've got lived experience. We talk about how do we measure culture shift. How do we talk about progress despite trends in fatal and serious injury crashes not necessarily declining? You could talk about the ever nebulous idea of impact. All of those are in this interesting realm, and people are always looking for proof. They want proof about why an intervention was needed. They want proof about why an intervention wasn't required. They want dashboards, they want reports, they want pre and post evaluations at the project level, at the program level. You need evidence for your funding requests. You need evidence in public inquiry responses, and you have evidence coming in from research partnerships. It's all around us, and making sense of how we piece those things together to tell a cohesive story about defining and measuring the success of Vision Zero is a massive challenge. And looking across jurisdictions, I see so many of us doing that in some consistent ways, but also in some different ways. So I'm going to put this out to the panel, and I'll let whoever is ready to go first just jump on in. But what are we learning from the work that you've done about where measures might need to evolve? Maybe measures that are really tried, tested, and true, or where some places are doing some interesting things around trying to communicate progress.
Raheem, if you want to go ahead and start.
Sure. Well, from the tax survey, again, we couldn't get too much insight other than sort of the what are you doing type questions. But it was quite encouraging to see that the way that progress is being measured is consistent with Vision Zero and the safe system approach, in the sense that most respondents are measuring fatalities and serious injuries, and much less focus on the non-injury causing type of incident. So that was one pretty critical finding. That wasn't necessarily the case a few years ago, even though Vision Zero, the name was kind of being out there. In terms of, and I kind of mentioned that, some data is not available to some smaller municipalities, but it was also encouraging to see among the responses the different sources that are being used. So I think, if I remember correctly, almost 90% of municipalities are using speed data. and we know of the importance of speed in terms of the likelihood of serious injury or fatality. So that was good to see as well. Some of you may be aware of the of another kind of source of data that is being used more and more, and that is traffic conflicts, so close calls. And I think it was about half of the jurisdictions either have done or are regularly doing traffic conflict studies, either in the absence of having collision data or to supplement or perhaps confirm the patterns that collisions are showing. So maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
And I can jump in here as well. One of the things we found from the landscape is that the Vision Zero programs are increasingly focusing on those measurable targets and outcomes, which is really great to see. It's important to show the work that we're doing and the progress that we're making, like you said, Jessica. We also see an increase of jurisdictions having those kind of interim reduction targets, which again shows that strong commitment towards measuring that progress, even if it is like a 10-year plan, having like a 2-year, 5-year marker. We're seeing that in the data as well. What we're also seeing is jurisdictions still measuring and continuing to primarily measure things through fatality and serious injury data. But we're also starting to see much broader measurement, things like on a lot of the dashboards, you'll see vulnerable road user outcomes. You'll see implementation of a number of different safety measures implemented, breaking things down by rates of population, so people are able to kind of compare across jurisdictions as well. And then also seeing things like societal cost increasingly also used as indicators. The other thing I wanted to mention is that through our interviews, jurisdictions are starting to talk about how do we actually measure the reduction of risk that these safety measures are bringing, that we're implementing, not just the fatalities and serious injuries after they actually occur. We know this is really difficult to do, and that's an ongoing conversation. But this kind of reduction in risk does give us this understanding of how the Vision Zero interventions are actually making our roads safer.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. And I'll just add that compared to 2017, the metrics we're seeing and the targets we're seeing are amazing. I think it was 42 of the 44 jurisdictions identified a target and clear metrics. And that means a lot in terms of political will and accountability. When people are willing to put those metrics towards what we're doing, they are looking to be held accountable and committed to those targets. So we were very pleased over the years to watch more and more jurisdictions adding targets to their plans.
It's listening to you talk about this, it brings me back to a few things that we're really trying to get at in Edmonton. So I know one of the things many of us struggle with is understanding that near crash aspect of data. And so you have the public reporting of that, and in lots of places that's really just the email that says, hey, I was crossing the street and almost got hit here. You have, I think, as Raheem mentioned, more technical evidence there coming from, video-based analysis, for example, where you're looking at conflict of movement. What did we see in the work, if anything, about how to bring that together in a way that's helping to support the work?
Jessica, do you mean how to bring together the different measures of safety and kind of have them all support each other or be presented in a way that...
I'm talking more on the conflict piece. Like, I think about it's very disparate information, right? You're not doing video-based analysis absolutely everywhere in your network. And then you're getting publicly reported concerns of conflict. And you have to parse through the pieces around the perception, the reality, and also who you're hearing from an equity perspective. You're not always hearing from all the people you need to in that sphere. So, how do we in the work look at that and how that supports maybe some of the more traditional data around speed, for example, or vehicle counts and whatnot?
Well, I would just briefly say not so much about how it's being put together, but the fact that it is important to look at all of those, because obviously lived experience is just as key in terms of gaining public support, encouraging the modes of transportation that that we want to in order to both support active lifestyles, for example, and then therefore plan for that and provide safety measures that will help support that. So yeah, so and then in terms of the conflict analysis, sometimes that's used in the absence of collision data, and other times to kind of confirm, or if you see a certain trend, for example, that hey, there's a lot of left turning across path here and a lot of collisions, but we don't know why, or we don't know enough about from the collision data. The conflict studies can sometimes help provide further insight as to why those are happening, and you just get a much broader sample when and conflict studies are actually being used and have been increasingly used more and more for active transportation. The algorithms are getting so good that they can very easily detect pedestrians and cyclists, and because we often don't have good enough information for active users and the profile of who's involved, that's where the conflict studies often help.
That's
Yeah,
interesting. So using them to support each other essentially, as opposed to putting them together. Great, Val.
yeah, and I think I would just add to that, something we try to do at Parachute is work with cities, work with jurisdictions, and take the data and try to tell a story about it. And I think it was Jessica, you and I were at the same workshop at CARSP, and just talking about, it was following a Guelph presentation that Nico had done. And we were talking about how to take the data, and whether it's using the dashboard or a communications campaign, and share it with the public in a way that's palatable. The storytelling piece, the lived experience, the near misses are really important in that, because we know that political will is supported by public will. So I think again, piecing all the pieces together, and really making sure we're telling the stories about what's happening on the roads is really important.
Without that perception and lived experience, we wouldn't in Edmonton have the evidence to be doing the level of neighborhood traffic safety work that we are. That's just not where the majority of crashes are happening. I suspect that's, not an experience we're alone in. And so really trying to bring the different lenses of evidence together helps us with, diversifying where we're present, and to your point, is something that elected officials are very supportive of, because they're hearing from people about their lived experience for the most part. And so when we can prioritize in that space, it's helpful on all fronts. Let's move on to talking about the most significant challenges that jurisdictions are talking about, they're encountering when they're moving from the initial commitment of Vision Zero into implementation, and what approaches are emerging that could help overcome them. Just to kick this off, one of the things that I've been talking a lot with folks across the country is this idea of strategic incrementalism. I know it's pretty sexy to do the big thing, to do the big citywide thing, or the really big massive change piece. And I've been thinking a lot about what that can do to culture. It sounds great off the hop, but if your public isn't ready for it, if your elected officials aren't ready for it, it can really have adverse effects on the progress of your work. It's not to say we shouldn't go for big and bold, but I think there's a lost art to the big and bold nature of strategic incrementalism. And that's something we've certainly seen over 3 now iterations of a road safety plan in Edmonton, is that early setup and progress, and sort of not hammering it on people, but bringing it into such a place that now people are, begging us for the work and wanting it desperately in their spaces and across the city. And that's helped us really turn up the dial in terms of pace here. What are you seeing in the work? What have people been reporting to you?
Yeah, I can maybe touch on this first. It's not something we covered well in the tax survey, but just from my experience working with many municipalities across, especially Western Canada, is, and I'm going to say for larger municipalities, where they've typically got the funds, they've got the staff. There's a lot of things in place that can facilitate success, and yet they're unable to achieve what they're intending to. And one of the things that I've found is the need for greater investment upfront in developing kind of the internal culture at the organization, because there's many situations where I found that although the department that may have been leading the way was sort of sold on the need for doing all of these activities, that wasn't necessarily shared by all the other departments that are needed in order to. So, for example, if the group that comes up with projects, based on safety needs and where there were perhaps more fatalities and serious injuries, then the design group isn't necessarily as informed or, let's say, even motivated to incorporate the types of approaches that are needed to address those patterns. So I think what we found is both in terms of a general understanding of Vision Zero across the organization. And that's something I think, so we often look to Edmonton, or I direct some of, the other municipalities to Edmonton to see how Edmonton helped do that up front, to sort of create that culture where, like you said, Jessica, they're then maybe coming to you instead of you always having to chase them and say, please do this, please do this, please do that. But I think so that you don't have to keep going, please do this, please, incorporating as much of to the processes, like these are it's important to select projects based on safety objectives. That's really at the end of the day what it needs to be the case in a Vision Zero environment. But also, what are the processes along the way, and how can they explicitly include steps of safety, whether that's safety audits or evolving design standards to actually operationalize that. That I think is those are steps I think that can go a long way and not just be just for one project. They could go across across the board.
Yeah, excuse me. Thanks, Raheem. And absolutely agree. I think what we see consistently, and most people on this call know this, is both the value of that political champion, but also the risk of not having a political champion. And we've certainly seen it at a provincial level in Ontario, in Alberta, where municipalities were making really great headway and had thriving, for example, ASE, automated speed enforcement programs, lots of buy-in. I know municipalities that spend a very long time, a lot of dedication to get buy-in from their communities on automated speed enforcement, and then to have it taken away, for example, in Ontario, was a real hit. And so that political resistance, I think, is big. And we certainly were hearing about that in the landscape document, I would say, in this version more than in the past. And maybe that's because what we're hearing about what's happening at the provincial level is trickling down to some of our municipalities that have been involved in Vision Zero for some time. Coming back to that public commitment, public will, certainly cities, municipalities are talking about the need for it. And in our landscape document, we actually have stories where municipalities look backwards and think that they weren't happy with how they necessarily rolled out their communications plans at the beginning. They didn't take the time to really try to build that buy-in from community, and they're doing it now. And so there's a real learning coming out about public buy-in, and I think that's a really important story to share amongst municipalities is to take the time to try to build the public will for the programs and the changes, because in a lot of cases, we're redesigning our roads. We're trying to change the culture on how we think about our roads, how we use our roads, who's using our roads, and we can't do that unless we have buy-in from citizens. So Other than that, consistency around funding challenges, data quality and evaluation was a very big trend in terms of obstacles.
You know, it's interesting thinking about, because I see Laraz from Guelph also commenting about their Vision Zero roadshow approach. And it makes me think, you know, you have sort of the internal challenge of implementation, and then there's an external challenge too. And something I think we missed in Edmonton in our last strategy was really reinforcing that internally. It came through the work over time. Like I've seen big shift throughout our organization, and people getting on board. And some of that has come from the amount of political support that this particular strategy had, and sort of the momentum behind it. And I think people started to read the tea leaves, if you will, about that. But this go around wanting to look at that very differently and taking the evidence that informed the strategy, and our approach will be around having collaborative workshops where we then sit together and say, what do we need to change about the work in order to be aligned across the corporation with this, and come up with that together, rather than my team, you know, trying to impose that, if you will, across the organization. We'd rather have those collaborative conversations rather than needing to sort of drop the Vision Zero hammer, if you will. And then externally, one thing I always think about is, we do these beautiful strategies, we get them designed, they're gorgeous. You go to your council or your elected official body and you get them approved or supported and funded, and you think people know about that, and they don't. The average resident of your community has absolutely no idea about that strategy, the work that went into it, the political support, none of that. And so I think the challenge really is then thinking more deeply about, how do we help people come along the journey, likely at a project level, rather than at the strategic level. You're going to have your folks who are, you know, advocating and involved at that level, absolutely 100% important. But to the other folks, it's really not until though you're implementing a project that they're starting to pay attention. And so really being thoughtful around the life cycle of your project, and thinking about every possible touch point you have to help people understand, to contribute, to get on board as much as possible is something that I think we all need to be really focused on.
Jessica, if I can just add something very briefly that your comment stimulated, which is, you know, when I was asked for one municipality to review kind of what went wrong with their Vision Zero strategy, because it was so promising, they had such a wonderful document, they started doing some great work, but then they started having some turnover. And what we learned in kind of interviewing those involved was, we got the sense that, first of all, there was no particular program for onboarding, in a sense, those the newer staff to kind of share the, you know, that culture and even the background that was present earlier with the previous people that were there. But also, and then one response that kind of sticks with me is, they said it wasn't in my job description. Well, maybe we need to put a little bit more in the job descriptions about, you know, if the organization has endorsed Vision Zero, that I think should perhaps make its way into job descriptions, or at least in some way be modified to help us achieve the goals that we need to internally.
Yeah, a really important point. And you know, I think about that a lot in terms of, what does it actually mean too? I mean, the interpretation of safety across different types of positions, engineers, engineering techs, but also all the many other professionals who are involved in road safety. That interpretation of what it means to be committed to Vision Zero can be so diverse. And so how do we set corporate expectations about what that looks like, and invite people into that space, and be clear about that? So really good point, and thoughtful. Val is reminding me that you all have wonderful questions, better than mine. So I want to go, I'm going to ask Kelly if you could jump in and maybe read some the first question there, and I have a couple that folks submitted in advance too, and we'll see what folks on the panel have in response to those.
Okay, there was one question that came in, and it's a very short answer, I hope, for Raheem. What about, was there any indication of, in the survey, of people using AI as part of their strategy development or work with Vision Zero?
Good question. There wasn't, among the responses for different kind of countermeasures that's, as I said, support each of the safe system elements. There was nothing that specifically referred to AI. Now, the survey was circulated over a year ago now, and maybe that discussion wasn't as mainstream as it is now. But there were questions referring to technology and just technology in general, such as, real-time monitoring and things like that. So there was some uptake of that among the larger municipalities, but something that I think there's a lot more room for, exploring that further.
Okay, thanks. Another question coming from
Oh,
Veer.
Kelly, sorry, Kelly, just one point on that. I know AI is a really complicated topic, but one of the places where I think there is an opportunity for municipalities, and I talk about this a lot in Edmonton, when we're communicating with the public, AI is a particularly useful tool for translating from, and I love you all engineers, but translating from engineer to non-engineer. I use it a lot to help our teams think about how can we say what you're saying in a way that conveys the information but is understandable to people who are not, technically experienced. And thinking about ways, to really like tighten up responses or expand in places. This is something that we've been doing a lot in Edmonton. I think we've got a lot to do in our day-to-day. If we can find some easier ways to get this stuff out the door so we can focus on some of the other pieces, and then also have those responses be more successful in terms of how they're hitting with the public, that's something that we should be leveraging. So just one quick example from me.
Thanks. A question about, and again, building on that thought, Jessica, but how can municipalities be better supported to evaluate the effectiveness of interventions so that they can clearly demonstrate outcomes and build the case for continued investment? So how can municipalities, the question is better supported, I suppose that has a financial implication, but how can municipalities be supported to measure what they do and make the case that they should continue doing it and do more?
Maybe I can touch on that since I tend to be involved in a lot of that. I think one of the key things that people miss out on is making sure you've got enough baseline data. So in order to kind of assess the impact of what you're doing, you need to know kind of where you're at now and sort of clearly identify that period that you're looking at that sort of represents, let's say, the current situation, and then have a good methodology in place. What we found in the survey, we did ask a question about, do you measure or how do you measure success? And I know we touched on a bit earlier, but more kind of on the evaluation, project evaluation level. Conducting before and after studies. I think about half of the respondents do conduct before and after studies. So that's important to then be able to, go to your council or the public and say that, look, this made a difference. Now we need to do the same thing at a whole bunch of other locations to have a greater impact type thing. To be even more compelling and more accurate, let's say, there are more sophisticated evaluation methods using. Okay, now I'm going to get into engineering talk for just a moment, like empirical Bayes and those types of measures that try to isolate the effectiveness and not have sort of noise that affect those results. So doing that, I think, can be compelling if it can be clearly explained to the audience that it doesn't just seem like it had an impact. It really did have an impact. Based on how the evaluation was done. And I think that's an area where I think we can help each other because it does take some capacity to do those types of studies. And just the quick plug for there will be a road safety guide for Canada that the Transportation Association of Canada has been feverishly working on for the past 3 years. So hopefully next year there will be a very comprehensive document that explains to folks at various stages of their journeys how to do some of these basic functions such as evaluation. So something we can all look forward to.
Practically or tactically, make sure you've built the cost for that into your capital profiles. Don't rely on your operating budgets. Operating can be tough to come by in municipalities, but make sure you're building it into the total cost of a project and leverage that sort of cycle in order to get you moving on to the next project from there as well. And in Edmonton, there's only so much times you can measure the effectiveness of a speed hump. After a while, I don't think you need to be measuring that every single time you put one in. But then looking more specifically at unique circumstances where you're putting it in, so you can learn past the sort of basic implementation into the more unique or creative. And we use that data consistently when we're trying to educate people about the improvements that come from those. Val and Anne, anything last from you on this one?
No, I think you guys covered it, and I'm just looking at the time and watching some folks wrap up. And I know we didn't get to all the questions, so we will circle back to any of the questions we missed, and we will get panelist answers and get back to you. And I just want to wrap up by saying thank you so much to Jessica for moderating this discussion. I knew you'd do a great job, just very engaging and just loving what's happening in Edmonton and the work you're doing. It's very inspiring for you and your entire team. And thank you so much to Raheem and to Anne for joining us. Kudos to the work TAC is doing. I love that Parachute and TAC are working together to make sure that we're supporting each other's work and we're not duplicating. I think that's a very big impactful move on its own. And I'd like to thank everyone who attended our webinar today. Please take a moment to fill out the quick survey. And once again, thanks to everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.